Good evening and welcome everyone to the High Stakes Testing Rights and Wrong, organized by the CTU Testing Committee. My name is Rebecca Redcliffe and I'm a member of the committee, a second grade teacher at Brentano Elementary, and a CTU Policy Fellow. Tonight we'll be hearing from committed rank and file teachers and parents about inequitable and racist standardized testing practices in CPS and our call to halt all standardized testing during this pandemic, if not beyond. We're going to wait a few more minutes to allow folks to get onto the call. And in the meantime, just some housekeeping. First of all, everyone on this call will have pre-registered, which helps give us peace of mind that this space will be safe from offensive intrusions and Zoom bombing, etc. Second, you will see a Q&A text box as the webinar proceeds. Please leave your questions and comments for our panelists as we go. We have a team of committee members who will be responding to in the Q&A text box. And at the end, if we have time, we'll take your questions. We will also try to answer them throughout the presentation if time allows. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for being here. To start us off, we have Maria Moreno. She's a member of CTU leadership. We're really glad she could join us, and she's going to start us off with some opening remarks. So thank you, Maria.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I want to thank the members on the committee, staff that are supporting this webinar and have done a lot of work and research. The work you're doing is very important. I want to welcome the attendees, their parents and educators and school community members. It's very important, the work that we're doing here. As was mentioned earlier, standardized testing started out as a method of assessing people of color. And it was a very racist form of keeping people behind. And it's evolved in a way that even today, the people and our students who are most hurt are Latinx and African-American students. And we've seen how harmful this standardized testing have been to our students in the last decades, and especially leading up to the record school closings, the 50+ school closings in predominantly African-American communities, and these test results were used to justify that. And so I just want to welcome everyone here. It's great work that we're doing, and it's a just fight that we have to continue forging forward to make sure that our kids are treated with respect, and that they get the right type of assessment that our teachers do based on what they see their kids performing every day in their classrooms. So thank you, everyone. I'm here to learn and continue on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Let's go ahead and get started. So first, some background. In mid-February, the CPS Internal Inspector General released a report detailing, quote, concerning levels of gaming and cheating techniques on the NWEA test given in elementary schools. Students were taking 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 times the recommended length of time to take the test, sometimes spending days or even a full week to complete it. Often they were coached to skip questions in order to generate easier ones. The list goes on. A number of us who were already highly skeptical of this test met up to take action, and our work together ultimately took the form of a reactivated CTU Testing Committee. We thought this was our moment to make the case to get rid of this test for good, because as we all knew from our experience in schools, it wasn't teachers who were to blame. It was the test itself and how the district used it for high stakes life or death evaluations through the racist SQRP system to label entire school communities as either successes or failures. Fast forward a few weeks, and COVID-19 forced us to evacuate our school buildings and teach and learn the rest of the year remotely. Following the lead of many other school districts across the US, the mayor and the board chose to discontinue all standardized testing for the rest of the year while we were all at home. A school year with no standardized testing. So it is possible. Our goal tonight is to talk about what comes next in this fight. Because the truth is, we just can't go back to the old way. We have to make a new way. And we are remote for now, but at some point we will be back in the buildings. And even now, while teaching and learning remotely through this global pandemic, we feel the pressure from CPS to go back to business as usual. And we see signs that they have no interest in doing away with their inequitable policies. The question is, how do we make the argument and mobilize the people and power to put an end to these testing and evaluation practices, especially when our students are currently experiencing so much trauma? And that is what we turn to tonight. We will have 5 panelists tonight representing rank and file educators and parents. We will also have some ways to get involved and resources to share. We will reference a Move On petition that will be available to sign, which you will find in the Q&A and will also be discussed later, so stay tuned. All right, let's get started with Terry Hain, who will look at how we got to this moment historically in Chicago. Terry is a longtime testing committee member and a wealth of knowledge on the history of the growth of standardized testing in the city. Terry?
Hi, I am a 24-year veteran teaching in Chicago Public Schools. I am a CPS graduate from the 1980s. I have the testing perspective as a student, a teacher, and a parent. My age and experience has made me the historian of this group. How did we get here? The term standardized test and high stakes testing is used interchangeably, but that was not always the case. Somehow standardized testing has evolved to punish students in schools for what's conceived as a lack of performance. While CPS has had the Iowa Test of Basic Skills since 1972, Illinois legislation for program evaluation was not created until 1985. This was the first year of what was then called the IGAP, then the ISAT, what is now referred to as the PARC or IAR. So when did this change start? There was a very different feel in the 90s when I started teaching in CPS. CPS hired its first non-educator, CEO Paul Vallis. The concept of high stakes testing was born. CPS created a promotion policy in 1996 requiring summer school at certain grade levels, as well as placing schools on academic probation. I taught 6th graders in a predominantly Latinx community. It was heart-wrenching to pass out the letters of summer school to my hardest working EL students, honor roll students who could just not make a cut score due to unfamiliar, biased language. It all came down to one test. In 2002, No Child Left Behind became law. The law tied federal funding to test performance. The pressure on students and groups receiving federal money, teachers and schools all escalated. Yet CPS felt more pressure was needed. In 2005, then CEO Arnie Duncan introduced Renaissance 2010 to close underperforming schools. He eliminated ITBS, stating ISAT testing will take 120 total minutes, down from the 210 minutes of Iowa tests. Time on tests will be discussed further by the next panelist. As Maria Morano pointed out in her opening remarks, the impact of Renaissance 2010 was harshly felt when 50 Chicago public schools were closed in 2013. Next slide. Fast forward 2011, Arne Duncan, now U.S. Secretary of Education, introduced an incentive to schools to perform well and receive additional funding. Part of that funding formula included connecting teacher evaluation to student performance on standardized tests. More Than a Score and Raise Your Hand started campaigns to push back on standardized high-stakes testing. At the same time, CPS decided more evaluation was needed and added NWEA to a growing list of mandated tests. Like its predecessor, ITBS, research states NWEA should not be used as any type of ranking for students or class performance. In 2015, PARC, also known as IAR, replaced ISAT in a national standardized and very short-lived testing movement. My role was present the history and show that these mandates are fluid and have ever evolved over the years and should not be standard operating procedure. The opt-out movement is a start, but there is much more to be done. Next, we will hear from Paula Barajas, a CPS educator, to talk about the impact of current testing mandates.
Hello, my name is Paula Barajas. I'm a special educator at Ruiz Elementary. And I wanted to talk with you, next slide, please. So really quickly about the excessive testing. So the average US student takes about 112 standardized tests, and that's based on a website called fairtest.org that has some really good research-based evidence. That's roughly 9 standardized tests per year for the average US student. Now, if you look at the students in Chicago public schools, they can take up to 200 standardized tests between K through 12, and that's on the low side of the estimate. If the student's an English learner, that student can take up to 244 standardized tests by the time they graduate from high school. If that student's an English learner with a disability, they can take up to 266 tests. And I want to reemphasize what my peers are saying here. Let's be clear, NWEA is not a mandated test by the federal government, nor the state. It's not tied to funding. It's a test that Chicago Public Schools is choosing to pressure schools and teachers to give 3 times per year. Next slide. Okay, so there's a recent article from Educational Leadership by Joe Feldman. It's September 2020, it just came out. And in this article, he notes that Stanford University, there's a program at Stanford University that surveyed 54,000 high school students across our nation. And what's most notable about this is at the bottom, 72% of those students reported that they always or often worry about taking assessments, okay? That's a lot. And next slide. I would say that this anxiety starts at the lower grades, kindergarten through 2nd grade. So if you look at this table, I have kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade here, and the names of the test, right? If the tests that are bolded are tests that are given 2 or 3 times per year, and those tests also have sub-tests within them. Right? So DIBELS, for instance, for a kindergartner has 4 sections in it. TRC, 2 sections. The math has 4 or 5 sections. Reach performance test is given twice a year. So the access test has 4 sections to it. So when you look at a kindergartner, they're exposed to 31 assessments in their kindergarten year, and they lose about 19 days of instruction. all right? So if you really notice, you look at the entire chart, by the time the student leaves second grade, they have been exposed to 99 standardized tests. And so I would, my argument to you is that this anxiety is starting at the lower grades. Both the teachers, the students, and the parents are all feeling the anxiety of the standardized testing that is given to these young students and the pressure of excessive testing. Next slide. Okay, so I want you to think about this idea. So there are about 178 days of instruction, okay? When you take out days for like holidays and classroom parties and the first, week of school and students and teachers are getting to know each other, right? But the average student in CPS, spends about 18 of those days testing, right? If you're an English learner, you're spending 22 of those days testing. And if you're an English learner with an IEP, you're spending 24 of those precious instructional days on testing. It's also, students and IEPs could actually go up to 60 days of loss of instructions because they're special education teachers. Per their legal IEPs, usually test them either individually or in small groups. So when that special education teacher is testing a small group of students or student individually, they cannot give instruction to the other students on their caseload, okay? This is ridiculous in my opinion. It's just horrible. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's think about this. Elite colleges and universities, they've heard the message, right? They know that students' grades and the curriculum that they are exposed to are better indicators of college success than a test score, right? Many of them do not even require test scores anymore, the SATs. They are using GPA and the type of classes you've taken in college as sort of better indicators of whether or not you're ready for their elite schools, right? Unfortunately, schools across the nation, and CPS in particularly, have not heard that message. They haven't heard the message to invest in stronger research-based curriculums, right? They haven't heard the message that teachers need to become better content experts. As a teacher, I need to spend more time learning my content than learning how to administer a test to a student, right? Like where that became a sort of a focus of my teaching practice is ridiculous. And CPS hasn't heard that I could spend some of that time working on parent-teacher collaboration, right? I mean, that's exactly what needs to happen. And if you look, there's a link down here for community schools initiatives. They talk about this idea of what does it look like to assess a whole child, not just their test score. Next slide, please. All right, and let's talk about test validity. As Rebecca, at the beginning of this, there's an Inspector General report that talks about how the NWEA test has some severe irregularities. And when that's brought up to Chicago public schools, they sort of brush it off as, oh, that's an anomaly. But teachers across our district know that's not an anomaly. That's not an anomaly that's happening. Teachers across the nation know this. The pressure on children with these tests cause these irregularities. They cause the anxiety, right? And actually in one Chalkbeat report, seventh grader told the investigator, right, that they were so worried about high school, right, that they would guess the wrong answers or let the answers time out, right? Now, if you think about test validity from the standpoint of an English learner, all right, so there are some organizations that will tell you, well, it's okay for an English learner to take a reading test in English, right? But they're an English learner. They haven't become proficient in the language of the test. That's ridiculous. I would never ask my daughter, who's currently taking French, to take a reading comprehension test in French, even though she's gone through 3 years of French, and that should tell me how good she's at reading and comprehending the reading. That's just ridiculous. And I think most people would say that too. So our English learners in particular, if they haven't become proficient in English, should not be taking the reading test in any NWEA, IAR. They should be exempt from that until they become proficient in English, right? And then there are better ways of assessing students with disabilities. Test. It's heartbreaking for many special education teachers across our district and the nation to watch their students with disabilities who we know have the ability, but learn and express their knowledge, skills, and abilities in different ways, right? These standardized tests don't allow for that flexibility. They just don't. And so I would suggest that we figure out a way for students with disabilities to be assessed differently. These are not fair tests for them. Next slide. And we're back to Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Paula. I know, I don't know about everybody else, but seeing that slide about how many tests second graders take a year as a second grade teacher, I felt the anxiety already. We are going to hear next from Lori Torres, a CTU teacher and a parent who has agreed to share her experience as a parent with us tonight. So go ahead, Lori. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I think it's important that we, as parents, let those listening know the impact of these tests on our children. I'm a mom of 3 in the district, each 2 years apart or 2 grade levels apart. And when my youngest was a second grader, as I'm watching the breakdown of how many different tests kids are subjected to, I noticed some changes in my own child while in second grade. He had previously taken NWEA, the optional assessments in kindergarten and first grade. But in second grade was a little different. At second grade, he watched as his older sister, who was very excited about the opportunity to go to a selective enrollment academic center, get in and celebrating her achievement, and then him wondering, why is he not on the same track she's on? He had attempted to take the test for selective enrollment as a 4-year-old and didn't do as well. Like his mom, he's not the greatest test taker, but nonetheless, not any less gifted than his brother or sister. This created in my son a level of anxiety and feeling left out that came from the exposure to these tests. He began to act out. He began to hate school. And as a mom, he then took him to therapy because you can better understand how to be himself as himself separate from his brother and sister. But he pays attention a lot. I am but as a mom who watches his 2 older siblings do this stuff with ease, it raises for a level of anxiety that I get. I was that kid. I'm a CPS kid myself. I get it. But this shouldn't be. The love of learning should not be stolen from our kids. And that's what some of these tests do. So I'm here because I think everyone should know. I mean, many of the people here on this panel are here for the same reason. This doesn't make sense. And it's not okay. And our voices have to be united in making all this make sense for our kids, regardless of grade level. We need to find a different way to see what our kids can and cannot do. We spend our time as educators differentiating how we teach to meet the needs of our kids, and to subject them to a standardized assessment is just, it doesn't show what they're capable of. And so we as parents and as educators, um, I pick up the torch for my kid, for all three of them in many different ways. And so I'm glad to be able to share just one experience from one kid in one school in my household. But there are many other stories like mine. We have to do better. We have to change this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori, for sharing that. I'm really sorry that your son had to go through that and that you had to go through that. And like you said, for your son and for all of our students, we need to change that. Next, we're going to hear from Kelly Longmire, a middle school teacher at Mollison, and she is here with us to discuss CPS's use of the NWEA and its impact on schools and students.
Sorry, I was muted. I so feel for Lori, and just as a teacher looking on the side, I feel those same anxieties that your son felt, but just from the teacher's perspective. When that time of year usually comes around, you know, it's run around to, we lose so much classroom time because we've been just using so much of that time just gearing for, you know, testing. Our school is 98% free lunch. So the kids that I serve in there are very well underserved. We did not have the technology, you know, that was supposedly supposed to be used to help, you know, with our curriculum and planning for these tests. And you can see the kids like, oh my God, you know, this test is coming up. I have to get this certain thing like that. What group, what category is going to put in? I just want to talk about a few things. Can you give me the next slide? So when we're thinking about this high stakes test, you know, for the NWEA, it makes up 50% of the SQRP. That means they are looking at this test and saying, we have to score high by any means necessary. They will do anything by any means necessary. We've had, I mean, it's happened before in schools where teachers are rewarded if their kids get high and they are attained. It was kind of weird, and we're looking into it, that one particular grade always scored extremely high. For some reason, this grade always scored high, and they gave the school the maximum amount of points. But then the other classrooms, you know, did not perform as well. So there were meetings that I wasn't really a part of, but I just started seeing, you know, a few changes. We knew that attainment and growth had to take up the majority of everything. So that became the focal point on every cluster meeting, that we're going to data. Since it was used to determine the grades 3, 6, and 8, they definitely focused on us. They lasered in, you know, on us. And knowing that, you know, that test, that score is going to determine if my kids get into the selective enrollment schools, because what was paramount. The 7th graders are right now having so much anxiety, and the 8th graders are having anxiety because they're saying we're using the scores that we didn't even do well on, and it wasn't really fair. And that was our last score, to saying, did I do well enough to get into this school? I'm a straight A student. Some of these kids are straight A's. They have been there every day, yet they say, but I didn't do well. I just didn't I'm not a good test taker. I just don't do it. And they start freaking out, start sweating. I can't do it, putting your head down. And this is what we see. So knowing that these scores are used to qualify kids for these schools that they want to get into, or these IB programs, we have to find another way. This is what I'm saying. We have to find another way. The magnet schools, the kids were spending a few, hours per day looking in. I want to get into Whitney Young. I think this school is going to prepare me for this college. I want to get into Brooks. How can I do? Well, maybe I should just try to do the academic program for 7th graders. Maybe that I can get into high school. I mean, get into the high school by there. But it's not a useful tool. I was told by our principal that you will not reach the level of distinguished or live in the land of proficient if your kids do not attain and grow. That means there are some teachers there that have been there for years and are fantastic teachers if you come into their classroom. But if their kids do not meet that get out of the red, as you say, or get out of the red or live in the red, you will not, there'll be something in your evaluation, in your reach performance. And it's something that you're doing. No, it's not the kids, it's you. It's you doing it. It's like, well, what about all the rest of the curriculum? What about when you come in? They don't care. It all narrows down to that test. And that test, if you grow, then the school grows and you make everybody else in the school look good, you look good. But some of our kids that know this will take, I don't know who is on there, but they take an extremely long time to take a test because they know if I don't do well, and then when they get to the last one, it's usually 52 or 53 points or questions. When they start getting close to that 50 mark, you can see them start slowing down because they're afraid to press that enter key to see what their score is. And sometimes they meet their goal. And if they do, you'll hear an outburst of a scream because it's so much pressure. And then the ones that can't, they'll say, what does this mean? Did I fail? What did I do? So it's really not fair. And I want to talk about a couple of things that makes it not fair as well. Can you go to the next slide? This is what I feel, and I'm pretty sure maybe some of you too, but it's inequitable, and I believe that the NWEA test is racist. It's not culturally relevant at all. They consider our school where the kids live in a tier 3 area. Clearly, it's not when you have the majority, not more than a majority of our student population and parents pretty much at the poverty level, encompassing our entire school. We don't have the resources. I think recently we just kind of got a grant to try to do that, but those grants are only provided for the schools that don't have the resources. We were just one of the lucky ones, right? We are punished for being underserved, right? These are the countless meetings, and we're met by so many of the network people that are coming in and walking around our school and watching us. Even now, I'm monitored. So when I come in there, I'm like, I formally, they said it's an informal observations, but they're watching every single thing I do. No, you need to make your questionings this way. No, you need to, and it's kind of unfair to the kids because it feels so robotic, and they're learning in a very robotic way. It can't be a one size fits all, but it's not accommodating our kids with special needs. We had that very outspoken in our LSC meetings. Promoting an equitable servicing for the students, that's how it's inequitable, de-emphasizing, well, I don't have that last punctuation, but I have colleagues of mine in other schools that last bullet applies to. It's not valid, as we said. We kind of determined, and I found so many articles and, spoke to the misuse of our NWEA that it's almost like it kind of makes teachers want to do other things to get that high score, whatever it takes to get that high score, right? Kids know that, like we said, they'll test out. If I sit here and wait long enough, it'll just phase out and I'll get another question. I'll get something easier because they know how high this is. This is not an indicator at all to the student. And I always tell them that this is not who you are. You're more than just this test score. Norm referenced if we know this is going against kids that we don't even compare ourselves to, really, It's not aligned to, we said, our district mandated standards. I believe that we have like I said, a lot of instructional time is lost because our only focus is the NWEA, beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year. And it's a significant amount of strain that, we've had a high turnover because of this. I mean, just really just can't do it. So we know that the amount, how well we do is linked to the money. We know that. And this is something that we really trying to change. We have a really good, group of LSE that they're taking this exact thing about the NWEA and they say and do away with it. At least I have their ear. But it does force our schools to deprioritize, SEL, things that we really need, social studies and science, because we're only focused on math and reading and how well we do with that. And that's it, that's all. So I think I had one more slide, did I? Yeah, so this is what the CPS is using to determine if you are well enough for to getting into the selective enrollment schools. So it's a little bit lengthier, this. I just tried to capture a picture, but it's in the GoCPS, gocps.edu high schools resources. So the students input their NWEA. This is from the 7th grade year. So my 7th graders are already doing it now, and right now they haven't even made it to the end of the year. They put in their scores for the reading and the math percentiles and their final grades for their 7th grade year. So I just put in straight A's, and I just put in someone that had a percentile, I think I said of 50 something percent for reading. And I think I did like 80 something percent for math. The schools that came up, and I'm gonna share my screen, but for schools that had a score, like, I'm just gonna use a couple, like Whitney Young, because I pulled it up already. Whitney Young, you needed a score of 385 on that selective enrollment test. So that's basically telling you really cannot even think about testing in there. Westinghouse, I'm just going some schools right here, these are the schools in our area. Westinghouse is 257. That's almost a near perfect score to get into Westinghouse. If they had their sights set on anything that was above 400, they could not do. So that knocked off for these students being straight A's in a tier 3 school that you could not think about Peyton or Northside, or you couldn't think about Lindblom or Lane. You couldn't think about Jones. You couldn't think about Brooks. You can't think about Hancock. And then it lists the schools that you possibly can go to. And when the kids looked at that, they said, this is not really like my choice. Well, forget it. I'll just settle. And that's what we don't want. We don't want the settling. So if I'm just a huge proponent that I just don't think test measures anyway. I wasn't a great test taker. I just wasn't. I was just fortunate enough to have my good grades back in the 80s get me into Whitney Young, and I just happened to do very well. I was just one of those bloomers that I can show you with my work better than I can with a test. And there are many kids that do the same thing or feel the same way that I do. There are plenty of parents that feel the same way. And there are a lot of teachers that believe that we should do away with the NWEA testing because it is not good. We must find another way. Come hook or crook by any means necessary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Next, we will hear from Tammy Vincent from DePriest Elementary, a committed member of the CTU Black Caucus and a member of the testing committee, to talk about how these high stakes tests promote a deficit-oriented thinking.
Okay, thank you. I guess I was just struck by how the selective enrollment schools in and of themselves are selective, and a lot of our students are not given the opportunity to have access to higher quality education than they're being offered at our neighborhood public schools. That in and of itself creates a disparity that will stick with our kids throughout their lives. So we've been talking about standardized tests and how they are racially, excuse me, I'm sorry guys, how they show a racial and ethnic inequality. The instruction that students are given is not matching the lives that they live. So now they're being asked to take a test that has nothing to do with anything that they've experienced, because these against norm reference tests that are normed to mainly white middle class society. So our kids are not there. We know that this, since the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus the Board of Education that racial segregation it was illegal and these schools are supposed to be integrated, and the schools are students should have access to the same quality education as their peers. That's not happening. So when we talk about an achievement gap, the achievement gap is something that's rooted into standardized tests, and it's something that's been historic. It's something that as instruction has changed, has been lessened. The gap was lessened in the 70s. Then with, as we talked about, the No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, and other education policies that became over reliant on standardized tests, we started to see that gap again. So we know that this gap has impacted Black and Hispanic students and low-income white students to the point that, you know, either their schools are funded to try to exacerbate the gap, or their schools are closed, their teachers are fired, the students are failed. So when we talk about have a deeper analysis of disparities in performance, again, we see that it's not a race-based thing, it's not an access thing, it's a socioeconomic thing where higher income and more educated families typically can afford to provide for more better educational opportunities for their students. And excuse me, and they have access to technology, they had access to the internet and other things that we realized during this pandemic, most of our students did not. So as we go to the get to the other side of this pandemic, they're already anticipating what they are to call a COVID gap. So to exacerbate this gap, a lot of what is being planned is to create more tests, to create more assessments to see how the kids are failing and how they were lost in this pandemic. So instead of are considering or academically considering how can we go back into the school with the new lease on life, essentially, how can we go back and better meet the needs of our students, knowing that a lot of the technology gap was also in terms of what did they have exposure to in the school? Were they in the Google Meets or the Zooms or using the slide programs or any of the other software that would have made it easier for them to transition from in-person instruction to remote learning? None of that happened in advance. So my thought is when we go back into this building, we have to also acknowledge the fact that our kids have experienced trauma. A lot of them are living in communities where the rate of infection is high. They've lost family members. They've been ill themselves. Parents have lost jobs and other resources they need in their communities. They didn't have access to it. So we have to go back, acknowledging the trauma that our students have experienced. And we have to see to the fact that we offer them instruction that acknowledges that and honors it and builds on it. We should not believe that that the deficit, well, the loss of instruction created a deficit in their education to the point that nothing that they've experienced has any value. So we have to create curriculum, again, that is rooted into their experiences and try to, and I guess capitalizes on all the things that they had to overcome just to make it back to school, without thinking that if you're not going to do well on this test, if you're not in this RIT band, or if you're not doing this, then there's something wrong with you. And that, again, I think to the point that Ms. Torres made, we cannot have our children, our students, hate learning and hate the school environment, because that's not going to benefit them long term. So I believe that many educators, given the autonomy, would create assessments that would build on what our students know and take them to where where we need them to be. You know, I've never been a supporter of Common Core standards, but there are skills that all people should have. And our goal should be to make sure that we're helping them get to where they are. Not everyone's going to have a standardized life, and we can't normalize their experiences. So our hope would be to build on what they've learned, to assess what where they are, and get them to where they should be with whatever help they can get from their educators. And doing well on an NWEA test is not going to be that thing. And to be so focused on selective enrollment admissions and not on the fact that we should have selective enrollment quality school for all of our students and not just the ones that are fortunate enough to have parents that can help them game the system. And I know that's not everyone, but I believe in equity, and our goal should be to come on the other side, be on the other side of this COVID with a sense of equity for all students. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tammy. So I am going to talk a little bit about what is currently happening in CPS during this pandemic and CPS's plan for the future and right now. So currently in the primary grades, there's really no set answer from CPS on whether schools should be administering TRC and DIBELS, which is the reading comprehension and reading fluency test. Some schools and teachers are being told that they have to remotely give students that test. They've received training in the beginning of the year on how to remotely give that test. And other schools are not experiencing that kind of pressure, and other teachers aren't. Just to give a little background, if you don't know what TRC and DIBELS is, students read a book and answer some comprehension questions with the teacher while the teacher measures their fluency. In second grade, this can take like 20 minutes to 45 minutes per student. So I just want us to all imagine as parents and teachers, one teacher giving their class of 30 students that test through Google Meets. That would take up a ridiculous amount of learning time and would put a lot of pressure on students in a time where they're already experiencing a lot of trauma and uncertainty. In grades 3 through 8 right now, the beginning of the year and the winter NWEA have been suspended. For students who are in 8th grade, there's the selective enrollment test that will be offered in November and December in person. And then the NWEA test will be administered for 8th graders. There is no window right now. CPS hasn't given an official date on that. They're just saying that 8th graders who qualify based on previous scores can take that test. And what shocked me, well, maybe I shouldn't say shocked, but what really struck me is that the 8th graders who can take this test are 8th graders who qualify based on their previous NWEA scores. So that might be their 7th grade winter score right before the pandemic, or if those students didn't take the 7th grade winter test because it's optional, it could be their 6th grade spring score. So there are students across CPS who are being denied the ability to take the selective enrollment test or the NWEA again because of a test they took in the spring of their 6th grade year, when they didn't know that that test would be used to qualify them for selective enrollment. On top of that, the CPS is offering this test and it will be in person, which brings up a lot of safety risks. So who is going to be able to take this test? 8th graders who not only have to qualify based on previous scores, but also 8th graders who are able to take the risk to be in person with other people who have grown-ups or someone who can drive them to the test and take the time to do that. So this is exacerbating an already inequitable system. In terms of what's happening in high school right now, the SAT remains a graduation requirement. And we've already seen that it is being administered this fall and will continue to be administered in the winter in person, despite the safety risks. There are some high schools like Back of the Yards College Prep has canceled their in-person administration due to safety concerns. The COVID rate in Back of the Yards is upwards of 27 or 28%, the positivity rate the last time I checked. So they made the decision to not put students and families at risk for the SAT. So what can we all do after hearing from all of these panelists I know I'm feeling inspired and motivated to pressure CPS to change these policies. So if you are as well, here are some things we can do. We can share our experience with high stakes standardized testing on social media. I don't know if some of us saw, there was a lot of great questions, and there was kind of a tweet storm going on yesterday, pressuring CPS to answer questions about remote learning. So the Twitter and social media are very powerful tools. And we can all work together as parents and educators and former students and current students. When we ask questions and push back on policies together, we will make a difference. So parents and teachers, we can work together. We can talk to the LSC. We can find out, question one, what tests are your students taking? What tests are mandatory that your students are taking? Which ones are optional? Why did the school decide to opt into those tests? Those are some really good questions. You can sign the petition, which will be in the chat, to suspend standardized testing during the pandemic. And you can join us in building a coalition of parents, students, and other stakeholders to organize at a school level to put an end to these inequitable testing policies. So I know we're not in our buildings now, and it might seem like CPS made a good choice to suspend fall and beginning of the year and middle of the year NWEA tests. But there is every indication that CPS wants to go back to business as usual when we get back into the buildings. And like Tammy was saying, they are going to say, oh, we want to measure the COVID gap or what learning was lost. So now is our time to really be prepared to fight and to unify around this issue, so our students aren't treated just like numbers or just like their performance on one test, one time of the year. I'm going to, and on that note, parents, we have Jenny Biggs here from Raise Your Hand Illinois to talk a little bit more about the work they're doing and we can all be doing together on this issue. Thank you, Jenny.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Biggs. I'm a CPS parent of 2 high schoolers, and I have a recent graduate too. She is a freshman in college right now. So that means this is my 14th year as a CPS parent. I am the Director of Communications and Outreach with Raise Your Hand for Illinois Public Education. Before I had kids, I actually taught high school science in the South Suburbs for 7 years. And this was pre No Child Left Behind. I left in March of 2002, and No Child Left Behind kicked off in February 2002. So when my own children entered school, I was shocked that my kindergartner, this would be in spring of 2008, my oldest, she was the first kindergarten class to be dibbled. And I was like, why is my daughter getting a standardized test? Because when I left teaching, there were standardized tests, but like Terry explained earlier, it was just like a thing you did. Your school was being measured and there was no high stakes attached to it. It was kind of like a thermometer, really. And my kindergartner was getting a standardized test. So my alarm bells went up, and I actually just started paying attention to public education, period. Since I'd been out of it for a while. But fast forward to Raise Your Hand, which has been around for about 10 years. Raise Your Hand came up out of school funding inequities, but throughout that time, we learned about all sorts of other inequities. And one thing that came up over and over again from parents was standardized testing and the overuse, the misuse, the stress, the anxiety, the low self-esteem they cause children, et cetera, et cetera. So everything that has been said in this webinar has come to us at Raise Your Hand by parents, and also by teachers and by teacher parents and principals and professors at various universities who have educated us with the research, et cetera, et cetera. So I am part of the CTU Testing Committee because Raise Your Hand has pretty much always been a part of the testing committee that CTU or other organizations have put together. I think we started with Julie Westerhoff of PURE, Parents United for Responsible Education, invited us to the standardized testing table in Chicago. Cassie Cresswell started More Than a Score Chicago. More Than a Score Chicago, there is still a website up and there are really good resources there. They're old, but some of them are still very relevant. There's like fact sheets on different tests that are still given today, and it's still relevant information. More Than a Score also still has a Facebook page. It would just be called More Than a Score, and Cassie still posts on there occasionally, so I would recommend following that. So More Than a Score kind of folded into Raise Your Hand. So Raise Your Hand kind of took over together a lot of the push against the misuse and overuse of testing. We were also very involved in the opt-out movement, and we picked up a lot of parent followers across Illinois because many parents were mad that they did not have the right to refuse a standardized test. Parents don't have that. We still don't have that right. ISB, or the Illinois State Board of Education, recognizes a student's right to refuse. So we actually had a law, HB 306, we were trying to get passed that would give parents the right to opt out. It did not ultimately pass or become a law. However, it was huge because it brought the discussion of standardized tests to Springfield. And I think it has really made a big difference in educating people who make big decisions. And it also really, it brought up a lot of discussion all over the place. So Raise Your Hand has traditionally put out opt-out toolkits. We still have an old one on our website. However, Cassie has an organization now called Illinois Families for Public Schools. So last year, they put out the testing opt-out toolkit for the IAR test. So that is on their website. We at Raise Your Hand still try to follow and hear from parents what's going on and answer as many questions as we possibly can. We also follow all the policies in CPS, which have testing in them, like promotion policies, the SQRP, the whole way you can apply to different high schools, which was just discussed by Kelly and by Rebecca too. So we kind of follow all of those policies that involved test scores. The last thing I want to say is our parent liaison for special education, Mary Fahey Hughes. She's been banging the drum for about 3 years on Go CPS and high school application process and how it discriminates against children with disabilities because the NWEA scores are not only used for selective enrollment, they're also used for specialty programs and CTE programs, and principals themselves set the scores that allow you to even apply to the school. So she's been for 3 years on CPS about changing that policy to make it more fair for everybody and to make it less, well, to not discriminate against kids with disabilities. So that's something that we have been watching, as well as how it impacts children in special education. You can follow us on social media. Pretty much if you search IL Raise Your Hand, you're going to find us. And I think that's all I have to say. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I really encourage any parent here to get more involved with Raise Your Hand. To end, we have a few questions or comments from some people who have joined us. So I think Amy, if you will be willing to share your thoughts. Maybe not. Oh, Amy, are you there? Amy Clark, are you ready to share your thoughts?
Ask that we would read for her from the
Q&A. Okay. Yeah, well, if someone's willing to do that, then.
I'm trying to pull them up. They got in the answered. Achievement gap.
Okay, we're gonna, yep, go for it, sorry.
Sorry. Somebody else can. I just was trying to pick up where I saw it was.
I found one at 737. I'll do one for you, Terry. So it says from Amy Clark, administering these tests through remote learning further invalidates the already invalid results. The tests were not designed to be used in remote learning in a context of a pandemic. Oh, I'm sorry. That was her statement. That wasn't her question.
That's okay. I think mostly it was statements. Thank you, Kelly, for
Yeah,
reading.
they were statements.
Yeah. And then Elizabeth Martin, would you be willing to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Elizabeth. My husband and I both work at Chicago Public Schools. My question is, how do we convince parents who are very comfortable and happy with the way the select enrollment process works, or the way their students perform on these different tests? How do we convince them to fight for us and to fight for the students who don't have the same access as their children?
Is there a panelist that would be willing to try that question out?
Hey, Amy, this is Paula. I hear what you're saying, and that's a tough question, I'm not gonna lie. So my daughters, luckily, actually benefit from that system. They are great test takers. I don't know where they get that from because I was a horrible test taker, but they are consistently knocking these standardized tests out of the park. And have benefited from that system. You know, they've gone to selective enrollment high schools, selective enrollment elementary schools, purely by their test taking abilities at the kindergarten level, right? And I think because of the way CPS is set up, right? So CPS is set up to have this sort of grouping of schools that, like, you're these special schools and, you know, elite, that parents feel that pressure, right? And want the parents that feel like they're benefiting from it, they don't want to give that up, right? They want their kids to be at those elite schools. But I think it's less about convincing the parents to want to give that up and more about convincing the system, right? I mean, I hear what you're saying, like it's hard to convince those parents and that's a difficult battle, but it's the system that is gaming it and making those parents do an us against them kind of mentality, right? Where I'm like, oh, great, my kids got into a selective kindergarten, elementary school, now selective high school, right? They've benefited from that, but it shouldn't be that way, right? I shouldn't have to literally drive my children across the city to go to selective elite schools, which I've had to do with both of my children. Neither one of them went to schools in my neighborhood because these schools aren't considered elite and selective, right? So I've had to migrate them out of my neighborhood. And many of those parents that benefit from that, they're either migrating their kids out or they live in area codes that are elite area codes too. I mean, let's be honest. So, I mean, I hear your question, it's a hard one. And I don't know if it's about convincing the parents, but more about dismantling the system that has made it so that we are doing an us against them mentality with children, which is horrible. We're doing this with children, you know? I hope that answers your question. I don't think it did though.
Sort of did, thank you.
Thank you for the question. And thank you, Paula, for answering that. We're a little over your time, so I want to apologize to everyone for taking a little extra of your Tuesday evening and 4 extra minutes on screens that were on all day. But to close with a few reminders of steps we can take going forward. So parents, teachers, find out what testing is happening at your school now, currently, in the pandemic, during remote learning, and also going forward when we're back in buildings. Parents, please connect with Raise Your Hand. It's a great organization. And also, please fill out our petition that was in the chat. I will end by saying I think it's really easy to feel like things will never change, but this is a time of national reckoning. There is no better time to abolish these racist and inequitable systems of punitively testing and ranking our students in schools that we talked about tonight. We can't go back, and I know that together, if we work together, we won't go back. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I hope you have a great rest of your night. Thank you all so much for coming. And thank you to our panelists. You're awesome.